All right, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Alyssa Zenz. I'm the pro bono counsel at Dorsey and Whitney, and I'm also on the board of Legal Corps. And Legal Corps is a nonprofit that helps connect volunteer lawyers with small businesses, minority-owned businesses, nonprofits who are in need of transactional legal assistance. And so Legal Corps is really here for you. Us lawyers at Dorsey are here for you. And there's a big collaborative of lawyers from across the Twin Cities that volunteer through Legal Corps. And so the main thing that we really want you to take away from today, aside from the great content, is that you're not alone, that we're here to help you get through this. We know this is a difficult time and that the prospect of rebuilding is very daunting. And we want you to know that you are not alone. There are a lot of lawyers that want to help you on a pro bono basis, meaning free of charge, and be here to help you figure out this process. And so really encourage you to use the different phone numbers and mechanisms that we'll be highlighting today, and also should be in an email that you receive from me to access that assistance so that you know that we are here for you. What we're going to do today is I'll be sharing my screen. You should all be able to see a PowerPoint that's up here that was also emailed to you. So if you have any problems with seeing the screen, you can look at your email and hopefully you'll find it there. And we'll also be making both the recording of this session and that PowerPoint will be available to you through Legal Corps' website. And so you'll be able to access that there. And we really do encourage you to share it with others. This is not meant to be only for those who learned about this in time to register. We really want everyone who needs this information to have access to this information. And so it will be there. After we've gone through our speakers today, we will have a Q&A session at the end. We welcome you to use the chat function that you can hopefully find in the Zoom. But if not, you can go to your email and you can email me a question as well that I will share with the presenters at the end today. But we do welcome you to use that. To kick off our session today is Dorsey and Whitney partner Jay Lindgren. He practices in the areas of economic development and land use.
Good afternoon, everybody. Whether you're joining us live or viewing this streaming afterwards, we're happy to be with you during this challenging time. What my colleagues from Dorsey, Kevin Dooley and Ken Logsdon and I want to do today is give you some practical advice and overviews to think about during this rebuilding process. And if we can go to the next slide, here's an overview of the things we'll be talking about. Thinking about very practical things on your financing that may exist today. How do you get relief? How do you look at leasing situations that might exist and get relief there? How to focus on the things that matter really immediately, like, for example, figuring out how to get community resources available to help you with an insurance deductible if that's what you need. Start thinking practically about how do you price what you need to do, what is the size of rebuilding, are you building something different or not? Think about that one of the first things you need to do is be having really good cost estimates, because that's going to tie into everything else. And then talk about any new financing that might be needed, including some special governmental, federal programs, and hopefully state programs that might be available to you. And finally, just practical advice on the kind of permitting and just an overview of what that permitting process is. But to begin, we're very pleased that we have a non-Dorsey person joining us today, Jonathan Weinhagen. Jonathan is the president and CEO of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber of Commerce. I know Jonathan well. He's a dynamic leader. He's focused on policies and practical solutions that help businesses of every size in Minneapolis, but also in our region as a whole. And for that reason, Mayor Fry tapped Jonathan to be one of the 3 co-chairs of an effort called Minneapolis Forward, which Jonathan will talk to you about, but it's really, in my mind, how the community as a whole is focusing on how they can assist you. So Jonathan is very busy with that work, but he's agreed to spend a few minutes with us today to give you an overview of some of the things that are happening with Minneapolis Forward and do it on a real-time basis. Jonathan, thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Jay, for having me. I'd start by thanking Dorsey and the team at Legal Corps for putting this critical session on, but more importantly, for the on-the-ground work that you're doing to help support businesses and the work that you've done over the course of the last 3 months. as we've been in the midst of a global pandemic. Hard to believe that it was just 3 months ago today that we first learned that our state would go into a shelter-in-place mode. We would bring our economy to a screeching halt. And I want to start by acknowledging that the businesses that we're talking to and talking about from the events of the last 3 weeks, we're coming off of 3 months of really challenging times. That's something that is never lost on us as we think about the work ahead and as we think about being your partner in that work. So with that, I would just say that we have your back. And what I'm going to share with you today is how we're thinking about the recovery effort in our city and across our region. And certainly, you'll welcome after the fact or in real time any feedback that folks may have as we build this work. The last 3 weeks in a day, we have seen the very worst and the very best of the city of Minneapolis. The tragic murder of George Floyd that was followed by civil unrest and destruction. We're starting to get a clear picture of what that looks like. Over 1,500 businesses damaged, 1,000 structures damaged in our city, 46 structures demolished to the ground in the days after the unrest and the looting that took place. Initial estimates of $500,000 or more in damage across our city, and a tremendous amount of work to do as we think about rebuilding, but also a tremendous opportunity at hand. When we think about rebuilding, we're really careful to think about rebuilding and transforming. And we want to be there and be your partner as you think about what your future looks like. Jay alluded to this a week ago yesterday. The mayor announced the formation of the Minneapolis Forward Coalition, which is really the group out of his office that is going to come together in a community-led, community-informed, community-driven way to drive what we envision will be a better future for commercial corridors across our city, whether it's on Lake Street or 38th or Chicago or Lagoon or Broadway. We recognize that the damage and the impact has been significant and widespread, not concentrated to just a few corridors in our city. So when we think about the work ahead and we think about doing the work differently, we always center community in that. I think that's going to be the thing that you see is different about this recovery effort. And it's the thing that has frustrated some folks in the weeks since it's been announced. We don't have all of the answers as we think about a recovery effort. That's very much by design. It would be super easy for a group of us to sit in the mayor's office and come up with a structure and a leadership team and a strategy and implementation plan and roll it out. But that would be losing a key component of what we know we need to do transformational change in our city, and that is community input. That's the input from business owners, from the immigrant community, from residents, from the people like yourselves who have invested in and built the corridor that we are looking to rebuild and transform today. So know that you have my commitment in that work, you have the mayor's commitment, and we will be tapping so many of you along the way, not just to support you, but also to garner your input and your thoughts and your vision for what you want the future of your community to look like. Again, we're still in the building stages of how we're going to execute on the work. I'm honored to be joined by Felicia Perry, who is the Executive Director of the West Broadway Area Business Coalition, and Allison Sharkey, who is the Executive Director of the Lake Street Council, two organizations that are deeply rooted in community and represent many of the businesses who were impacted by the damage of the last 3 weeks, and two organizations that have aggregated significant resources through GoFundMe efforts, collectively in excess of about $10 million. And they're beginning to think about how they're going to deploy that. So you're going to learn a little bit later about some of the access to near-term grants and capital as you're thinking about things like insurance deductibles and gap funding. These are going to be funds that emerge to support you as you think about rebuilding into the future. Later this week, as early as tomorrow, we hope to announce a core strategy team of community leaders, representative of the community that we're rebuilding for, to help us steer and lead this work moving forward, and subsequently a broader group of community-based partners and organizations who have signed on to say, we want to help. whether it's bringing financial capacity to bear or technical assistance or otherwise. There's just been a tremendous outpouring of support, and the Minneapolis Forward work really becomes a vessel for driving that work forward collectively. We know it's a marathon and not a sprint, which is fitting because we have a mayor who is a marathon runner. In fact, for those of you who don't know, his very first introduction to the city of Minneapolis was when he came here for the Twin Cities Marathon a number of years ago and fell in love. We anticipate the physical rebuilding will certainly take years, but the rebuilding and transformation of the community could be a 5 to 10 year window. I'll walk you through briefly the 7 bodies of work that we're thinking about as a coalition. We believe this is going to be iterative and that it's going to evolve. But as we think about the work, we're framing it in 7 buckets. First is a priority around Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrant-owned businesses who either owned or leased their space in a building that was destroyed or directly impacted where insurance will not cover the total loss. This includes total destruction, fire, flooding, looting, and related property damage that comprised the structural integrity of the building and resulted in an immediate health risk if occupied. So we recognize that a lot of businesses had property and casualty insurance, a lot of buildings had property and casualty insurance, but we also know that many folks were underinsured and there's going to be a gap, and we are committed to looking towards solutions that solve for that gap. Number 2, focusing on owners of real estate that has been destroyed or directly impacted where the insurance will not cover the total loss. So recognizing that many of these property owners will want to rebuild, some of them will look at this as an opportunity to vacate. We're going to be looking at strategies to make sure that community ownership is centered in the future of this work. The third is retention of businesses in the community at the start of the response to the murder of George Floyd, who are there at some point in the future. So very early on, me and my co-chairs made a real commitment that an initial metric is that retention of the rich business community that existed 3 weeks and a day ago exists 2 years from now. And we're going to hold ourselves accountable to that. And as we think about building strategies and raising funds and deploying those funds, making sure that that's one of our guiding stars. The fourth is residences destroyed and directly impacted. Again, where insurance will not cover the loss. We know that we had a housing crisis in our region, in our state, in our country, headed into the pandemic and into recent destruction. We know that that's going to be felt more acutely through the destruction of some of the housing that was coming back online and some of the housing that existed. The fifth is solutions that implement economic inclusion and stabilize immediately impacted communities. One of the things we know about the quarters that were most devastated by this is they're disproportionately populated by Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrants. And we want to make sure that we are bringing an inclusive approach to this transformation and recovery. The sixth is immediate and sustained needs, such as food and transportation for impacted residents. One of the things that sometimes gets lost in crisis response mode is the fact that we have newly created food deserts. The Target and the Cub are offline right now. So some of the critical areas for people to access food is offline, and we need to think about those immediate strategies and the sustained strategies over the course of the next 6 to 9 months to make sure that this community is well served. And then the seventh is enhancement of the physical environment in a way that reflects the community that lives and works in the area today, with a real nod towards this concept of not necessarily avoiding gentrification, but wanting to make sure that gentrification doesn't include displacement. We have a real opportunity here to envision and to build a city and neighborhoods that look different and look better than the ones that we left 3 weeks and 1 day ago. We want to make sure that community is at the center of that, the community gets to participate in that, and the community benefits from that. So those are the work streams that we are undertaking. Looking forward to bringing in as many people as are willing to join us in this work. On behalf of the mayor, I thank everybody who has reached out, everybody who has offered support, and everybody who will offer support and resourcing in the coming days, weeks, and months. I think we're going to continue to see the very best of the city of Minneapolis. And we're going to continue to show the country and the world the capacity that exists here, the opportunity that exists here, and the resolve that exists here to build something special. So with that, I will just once again, to the business owners out there who are hurting, we see you, we hear you. I've been out on the street. We have your back. I very much look forward to getting to meet so many of you in person and participating in your success through the recovery. Thank you.
Jonathan, again, on behalf of everybody at Dorsey, thank you for taking the time to join in this effort and the work that we're doing with Legal Corps. We know that you're going to go on right now and continue that work. So I think the title of Real Time makes sense, because what is going to be happening is a series of updates, and I think we all have to have the knowledge that there's just going to be a lot more information coming up. So thank you for doing the work, and we appreciate you being with us today.
Absolutely. And Jay, as a follow-up, if you're sending out some information, feel free to share my contact information. If anybody wants to reach out for any reason, always welcome the outreach.
Thank you very much again, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jay.
With that, if we can go to the next slide, I want to introduce Kevin Dooley, who's a partner of mine in our Minneapolis office. He's a finance attorney and works regularly in creating successful outcomes in bank financing, and he wants to talk with you about financing relief. Kevin?
Thanks, Jay. Good afternoon to everyone. What I want to focus on in the next few minutes in this segment of the program is to help the participants here, small business owners affected by both COVID-19 and recent events in our city, to, if you will, buy time and maintain the status quo with your existing lenders, who may either be looking at defaults on your loan agreements or are otherwise very concerned about your ability as a borrower to continue to perform your obligations. So these are intended to be practical suggestions for you to think about and implement as you go about maintaining good relationships with your lenders. And when I'm talking about lenders, it could be a bank, it could be a credit union, it could be an equipment lessor if your business is one in which you use any one of those forms of financing. Now, during these sort of tumultuous times, lenders value information and input and staying well informed about the condition of their borrowers. And this situation certainly calls for your taking preemptive, proactive action and maintaining regular communication with your lender so that you can maintain their confidence and willingness to work with you through this difficult time. So even if you presently don't have a payment default with your lender, it would be a very good idea, if you haven't already, to reach out to the lender to inform them of your current circumstances, of your plan for rebuilding, working with them to create the best possible outcome as we go through these difficult times. The best way to communicate with your lender, of course, is in person. Personal FaceTime is the most persuasive way to demonstrate to your lender that you're serious about rebuilding and that you want to collaborate and cooperate with the lender so that they can maintain confidence and be in a position to help you if you need restructuring or amendments or other changes to your existing loans. So pick up the phone, use the email, better yet, meet with them in person to maintain that informative, positive dialogue. So second, once you've sort of taken stock of your situation, it's important for you to either directly or with your current legal advisor, or if you wish to use Dorsey's pro bono services to work with us on reviewing your existing loan agreements so that you understand what your rights and obligations are, and that you also have an understanding of what your lender can or cannot do under current circumstances. this is not the time to be relying on your assumption or your recollection about what your loan agreements provide for. This is the time to have them examined thoroughly so that you can come up with a summary of what you are entitled to do, what you can't do, what your lender may or may not be able to do as well. Because only armed with the knowledge of your existing agreements can you go about a path to a good outcome with your lender. So for example, there's some concepts that might be in your loan agreement that are worth special attention. Many loan agreements have what are called cure periods, which are provisions that allow you, the borrower, to make up or fix a default that may exist. So for example, if you are in payment default on your loan, that does not necessarily mean that your lender can call the loan and take action. You may have a cure period that allows you to have additional time to cure the payment default, renegotiate the terms, and do other things that will keep you in good standing with your lender. Another concept that's important to understand in your loan agreement is what are the rights that the lender may or may not have to take the collateral or the property that may be securing your loan. Obviously, in this circumstance, you want to know how much time you have and whether or not you're going to continue to be able to have access to your business operating assets. So those provisions need to be looked at carefully. And I guess the third category of provisions that would be fundamentally important at this point in time is whether or not you as the business owner have given a personal guarantee of the loan. And hence your personal assets may or may not be subject to lender recourse. So those are just a handful of the topics that would be covered in your loan agreement. And again, calling for taking the time now with an advisor to go through them so that you have a complete understanding of both the good facts and perhaps the negative facts that are included in your existing documentation. So next, after you understand what the rules of the road are in your current circumstances and have established a dialogue with your lender, it's important to really sharpen your pencil, take a look at your current and future cash flow assessment given recent events. This may be an exercise that you already do as a matter of course in your business, but under these circumstances, it's particularly important that you update your cash flow assessments so that you have reliable information that you can present to your lender to persuade them that whatever form of relief you may want to obtain from them is justifiable. With this in mind, it's important to develop your income and expense projections using a variety of scenarios given the COVID-19 circumstance. So for example, as you're starting to develop a better understanding of when your business may be able to reopen and to what capacity, it would be important to factor those variables into your cash flow assessments so that you can present a series of alternatives to your lender, taking into account what you think, based on objective information and your best judgment, is likely to happen in the months ahead. This will maximize your likelihood that your lender will be accommodating, willing to provide some relief for you because you're providing them with information that's important for them when they meet with their credit committees and deciding what type of relief they can afford to you as one of their borrowers. So once you've gone through that exercise of your cash flow assessments and taking into account what your circumstances are in your existing loan agreement, you're then armed to come up with a sort of plan for requested relief with the bank. And I would suggest that you try to look at this as an opportunity for you to take the first step with your lender and present what you think is the best path forward for you and for the lender, rather than waiting for the lender to seek you out and ask for explanations as to why there may be defaults and what is your plan. Again, these are all steps to take to develop confidence in your lender and your lender's understanding of your circumstance and their willingness to assist you to move forward. Everybody's circumstances are different. So these steps are simply ones that have proven in the past to be successful in workout situations. And in my day-to-day practice, I typically represent lenders. And as a result, these are tips, guidelines that are based on practical experience that has more often than not led to a successful outcome, not just for the lender, but also for you as the borrower. So before I turn it over to Ken, where he can talk about SBA programs, I did want to make one other practical suggestion. In times like this, when there is a great deal of uncertainty about community activity, business interruption, companies and individuals in desperate need for some degree of financial assistance, there are always opportunistic third parties that will try to take advantage of this situation through different kinds of financing scams. So in addition to your normal good judgment, it's particularly important now to be on the lookout for third parties approaching you with promises of relief and other ways to help, which come with it the requirement that you share with them sensitive business information, social security numbers, bank accounts, and the like, which are sort of tip-offs that they're really not there to help you, but to take advantage of your situation. So just be particularly cautious about those kinds of circumstances coming up. I hope that this has been helpful to you in identifying a general approach to how you can work with your lender during this transition time, and want to reinforce the offer that has been made for the Dorsey lawyers to work with you on a pro bono basis should you decide that you would benefit from our assistance. And if we don't work with you directly, please do know that we are all rooting for you to successfully return to your business.
Kevin, thank you very much for that great overview. I want to introduce Ken Logsdon, who's another one of our finance partners. Ken is actually based in Salt Lake City. And the reason Ken's joining us today in part is because, and maybe in a strange way, this is a good thing about all the bad things happening in Minneapolis and St. Paul right now, is that coming after COVID-19, there have been a lot of efforts to really focus on what the governmental relief packages are. Dorsey in particular has formed something called the Government Relief and Incentive Team. Ken has been a big part of that effort, and as a part of that has focused on the Small Business Administration programs that are done at the federal level and that might be available to you in this situation. So Ken, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the audience for having us to deliver this critical information at this time. As Jay alluded to, it is curious timing in that we have a pandemic that's ongoing, and that speaks directly to the next two programs here that we're going to talk about, the Paycheck Protection Program and Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Without COVID-19, it's unclear how helpful the SBA would be for businesses that are struggling here in the Minneapolis community. And also be mindful that these programs may help some that are listening and watching more than others. And you'll just have to pay attention to the details of what's required for each of these programs to see if it would be beneficial. But to begin, I will talk about the Paycheck Protection Program, and then I'll follow with a discussion around the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. But what is important here is that these are both been implemented due to a pandemic, COVID-19. And because of that, the geographic locations that are permitted to participate, and the businesses that are located within those geographic locations that are allowed to participate in these programs is in the entire United States. So that clearly picks up the metro area of Minneapolis. And so all businesses are in the disaster loan, so to speak. With that, let's talk about the Paycheck Protection Program. As it is described in the title, Paycheck Protection Program, that's exactly what it is. If you haven't already heard quite a bit about it, I'd be surprised if you haven't, then you should know that it really is about protecting payments to employees. Now, some businesses' situation might be different, such that their operations have ceased completely because their only business has been burned to the ground or destroyed, or is currently so damaged that they don't have any patrons. And so there are things to consider as to whether the utility of a program that's designed to keep the employees employed, or at least on the paycheck, is going to be helpful in your particular situation. That said, the use of proceeds of the loan can also go towards other expenses, and that includes rent, utilities, and mortgage interest payments, and that can be mortgage on real property and mortgage interest payments on personal property. That's like equipment financing, for example. As for what are you dealing with, what kind of loan can you expect? Because the Paycheck Protection Program, and I'm going to refer to it now as the PPP, is tied to paychecks, the maximum loan amount will be the lesser of $10 million or 2.5 months worth of the business's payroll. So you'd have to do a little bit of calculating of the payroll costs that are included to arrive at that number. But payroll costs include salaries. They also include benefits. So it is a relatively nuanced analysis for you to figure out exactly how much money you're able to receive, but that'll be the loan amount. With respect to the terms, the interest rate will be 1%, and it will be over 5 years. Now, there isn't a requirement to start paying on the loan, interest or principal, right away. There's a deferment period as long as up to 10 months following the disbursement of the loan, in which no payments need to be made. There's a forgiveness feature I'll talk about here in just a minute, but it's important that you're not going to be required to make payments on that for the first 10 months. As for the businesses that are eligible, so I've already made mention of businesses located in the disaster area, which includes the entire United States. So that's not an issue, but business size is a consideration. One of the main requirements is that the company or the business have no more than 500 employees. Now, that also has to factor in affiliates, and that's something that must be considered. And affiliates is a very broad concept. It usually takes a little bit of thinking through to determine whether one business is affiliated with the other. But for example, if you happen to own, as a sole business owner, a couple of different businesses, even in different industries, likely they're going to need to be considered in the aggregate for purposes of determining whether you satisfy the 500 or less employee number. And that's also based on 500 employees or less averaged out over the last 12 months. And there are exceptions to this, just to bear in mind. Hospitality and food services businesses are able to not have to concern themselves with these affiliate rules. And also there's also the North America code system that the SBA looks to for certain industries. So that in some cases, a business could certainly have more than 500 employees, but still satisfy the requirements under the PPP. So be mindful that there are some exceptions to this. Another requirement is that the business must have been in operation February 15th of 2020 and had employees at that time. So unfortunately, if you're a relatively new business, if you opened up shop post February 15th, unfortunately the PPP will not be available to you. And we'll talk about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program in a moment to see if that could be helpful. As for the use of proceeds I spoke to earlier, the primary objective is to have the businesses direct the use of proceeds towards payroll costs. But you can also use the proceeds towards rent, mortgage interest, utilities. And there is a threshold requirement for the use of proceeds that no less than 60%, 60% of the loan proceeds goes towards payroll costs. So be mindful of that. There's also a forgiveness feature baked in where, if you use the use of proceeds as required under the PPP over the initial 24 weeks following loan disbursement, you can actually be entitled to forgiveness for that loan amount. And if it happens to be the full loan amount that was initially dispersed, a potential 100% forgiveness. Essentially, the loan could turn into a grant, and it actually doesn't count as income for income tax purposes. So there can be some material benefits there. As for the types of businesses, it's very wide open. Most businesses will qualify. Sole proprietors will qualify. Independent contractors. I mean, it is a very broadly applicable program. And there's a few exceptions that certain nonprofit entities that will not qualify, but for the most part, it's very likely in your particular situation that it will qualify. As for the need, this is the interesting component to this, because as I started at the outset, we're dealing with several, catastrophes of sorts. It's very tumultuous times. And we have the pandemic of COVID-19. And so the question then is, well, can you take advantage of the PPP, even though you're really needing it due to the economic troubles that have followed due to the latest disturbance there in the metro area of Minneapolis? And the answer is yes. There is a certification on the application. And the certification for the need for the loan is simply due to the economic uncertainty. The loan request is necessary for ongoing operations. Interestingly, it doesn't speak directly to COVID-19. And so a lot of businesses, I suspect, nonetheless, are going to be impacted by both COVID-19 and the most recent events here in the metro area. And so maybe it's really a non-issue, but I think it is important to keep in mind that if you are concerned about the certification that's required in the application, it is a broad certification. And furthermore, the SBA has informed the business community just recently, relatively recently, with respect to the length of this program, that loans under $2 million will be treated as if that certification was made in good faith. So there's additional flexibility there with respect to potential businesses here on this in this webinar that might be able to take advantage of this program. As for other terms to be considered, there's no requirement of a guarantee. There's no requirement of collateral. That actually is not the case with the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but that's important to keep in mind. There are no fees or prepayment penalties. Now, when it comes to what this is, it is a debt obligation that could potentially be fully forgiven. So if you do have other loan facilities in place, as Kevin mentioned, then you also will likely need to work with your current lender to allow them to permit you to get the PPP. For obvious reasons, in my particular case, I have not seen a single lender yet say no, because the lenders tend to be rather accommodating due to the current economic environment. And also the terms are so favorable and potentially fully forgivable, those loans, that lenders tend to be very comfortable with it. But that is something to be mindful of. If you do have a current loan facility in place, that you might need to actually speak with your lender about this particular program as well. Now that's the PPP. There is money still available. Early on, there was worries that the money would go fast and disappear, and it essentially did, and has been replenished. And the latest figures show roughly about $100 billion remains available under the program. So you can still go to treasury.gov. There's more information there for you, and also a lender locator if you're looking for a lender that might be participating in the program, and you can start on the application process. As for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, I'll call it EIDL for short. The EIDL program is different in that there is not this need that the business be in operation as of February 15th, but it's also a little different in that it's more or less a true loan that's intended to be used towards the business. Now, for companies that already have a lender arrangement in place and a loan facility that they have access to, or a term loan that they've recently received, the EIDL program is not likely going to be terribly helpful because it is a completely new loan, and depending on the size of it, will require a guarantee by a principal and some collateral. And that likely will cause problems with an incumbent lender. And so therefore, just be very mindful that there's limited utility for this program if you already have a debt facility. As for the loan amount, it can be up to $2 million, but it's needs-based in that they're going to take a look at the business and determine whether the business does in fact need the loan. As the interest rate is going to be 3.75% per annum for private businesses and for-profit businesses, and 2.75% for nonprofits. The term can vary dramatically. It can be as long as 30 years, and there is no deferment period. As for use of proceeds, it's a bit broader. It really is intended to be a loan for the ongoing operations of the business. So there's going to be less restrictions on that front. However, there is not going to be a forgiveness feature. So it is a loan that must be repaid. As for the size restrictions of the business, it is very similar to the PPP, at least through the end of this year, in that businesses with less than 500 employees are going to be eligible for the PPP or for EIDL, as well as the PPP. And by the way, keep in mind these programs are not mutually exclusive. A business could actually apply for both. And the affiliate rules I mentioned earlier under the PPP do apply to the EIDL program, so keep that in mind. Interestingly, the EIDL program contains this an emergency advance feature, which I think could be helpful in that within just a few days of applying for the EIDL loan, the business could receive up to $10,000 in grant money. Even if that business does not end up qualifying for EIDL, they will be permitted to keep that money as a grant. Now, if they also received money under the PPP, the money under EIDL in the form of the grant is supposed to be offset about with respect to the amount that will come under the PPP. So you don't get the benefit of that grant money and also the PPP simultaneously, but you can still, again, do both programs. As for the type of business, very broadly applicable, very much like the PPP, but in fact, it picks up a few more nonprofit institutions that aren't otherwise picked up under the PPP. There is no loan forgiveness, as I mentioned earlier. As for justification, it's interesting because this does require substantial economic injury that's caused by COVID-19. So this program is a little more unique from the PPP with respect to the situation at hand here, because I think you do need to be prepared to tie the need to this particular loan to COVID-19 as opposed to the more recent disruptions in the metropolitan area there. So that's one particular caveat that I have. As for a guarantee, if the loan amount is over $200,000, there will be a requirement for a personal guarantee. If the loan is over $25,000, there may be a need for collateral. If the loan exceeds $350,000, collateral will be required. There is no prepayment penalty or fees under the EIDL program, much like the PPP. And again, it is a loan that must be repaid, and it's a needs-based analysis. So that is the general overview of both the Paycheck Protection Program and Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. If you're interested in an Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, the best place to go there is SBA.gov. There will actually be a link where you can complete an online application. Unlike the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, the best spot to go to is Treasury.gov. And you'll see that you can actually look up lenders that might be in your local community, frankly, nationwide, that are prepared to process your application. And with that, Jay, I'll turn it back over to you.
Ken, thank you very much. I'm going to cover our last two topics, which in addition to the private financing and the federal financing options, I'm going to talk a little bit about the community and the state of Minnesota options that are available or developing. And then I'll cover also our last topic, which is some of the city regulatory issues that you should be thinking about now as you plan your budget and your finance strategy to rebuild. So first, on the community funding resources, as Jonathan mentioned at the beginning, already within Minneapolis, the two local business entities that many of you, I'm sure, are not just aware of, but probably participate in, already have developed a pool of around $10 million. And so I can't direct you today to a loan or a grant application, but I think what you want to do is be watching, looking at the website that you see on your screen, just as in real time, Jonathan and his colleagues from those organizations are putting together the plans to release that money. I see that money first and foremost as your initial gap financing. That might be that short-term relief that allows you as a very small business to find a way to pay for your insurance deductible if you do have casualty and property damage that allow you to build, but it's obviously in this challenging time, maybe even difficult to come up with the however many thousands of dollars to get to that. So I think these are very good places, and I suggest that you watch those. We've been sort of Minneapolis focused, but that isn't the case. In St. Paul, and especially in the University Avenue area, there are similar resources and similar kind of damage that's occurred. And I would direct you to the Neighborhood Development Center. And in addition, I did have some conversations with the city of St. Paul, and they have an open website for business resources, and they're attempting to do some real-time updating on this topic area. It's what they've used when they had local money available for COVID-19. And I think there's some hope that there might be some additional resources there. So if you're in St. Paul, pay attention to those two. And then if we can go to the next slide, again, these are things that aren't available today, but we have to remember we are in a special session of our legislature. And this week, at least these three bills are having hearings as early as tomorrow. And so it's hard out of any legislative process to predict what might happen, but there is a bill in the House of Representatives that would make $125 million available for grant and loan programs, specifically for the kind of rebuilding that we're talking about. In addition, and that's House File 6, if you want to try to track that. And again, we're happy to work with Legal Corps and make sure we're providing updated information on the status of that. By the way, I do have Dorsey's legislative team that's working with the legislature tracking this legislation, so we'll have real-time updates. Then the next one is another form of relief, not really in gap financing, but something that could give you relief for two things. One is, as you rebuild, create sales tax exemptions. Construction in Minnesota is subject to sales tax. Often when there are special purpose kind of projects, the legislature will create exemptions from those sales tax that then lowers the cost of construction. So I'm hopeful that something like that will come about. And then the final thing that's in this second point, House File 79, is some level of property tax relief that would help with ongoing cash flow. Another concept is House File 87, which would create a new kind of entity that would be involved in distributing money. And so I don't know what the final outcome of this. I'm personally hopeful that the first two gets passed with companion bills in the Senate and something like that happens. The third one would be a longer term strategy that would probably go again to the things Jonathan talked about, is how do we look, out numbers of years. So I don't know that that would be a great tool for you immediately, but it's something to pay attention to. And then for our final topic today, if we can go to the next slide, I wanted to talk about change a little bit. We've been talking about money, but I want to help you think about what are the ways that you're ready to spend that money. And first and foremost, I mean, you know what your damage is, you know what your building is, you've been working on that already, but I think it's really important to start with good cost estimates. And so as you note, we have another upcoming seminar this Thursday, the 18th, that will be about construction. And so I do encourage you to take advantage of that. I think one of your very first steps to get an idea of your budget is to figure out how to find the right contractor. And I'll make a few points as we go through this, that selecting that contractor might become one of your most important things, other than finding the right sources of funding to rebuild and to fill any gaps. The reason the contractor is important is not obviously just for the ability to do the work, but because the contractor, if you're essentially rebuilding what you already have, the contractor is going to be able to shepherd you through the city approval process. I'm hopeful that we will make through Minneapolis Forward and also in St. Paul some things that create some streamlined approval processes. But again, as somebody that works in land use regularly, I have to tell you, it can be complicated. Your contractor can actually be your advocate. If you have a project that maybe even needs some other kind of designer, like an architect or a design builder, and not just a contractor, you know, rebuilding a brick and mortar building, that professional will give you the sense of good cost estimating and to help you through the city. So please think about that carefully and take advantage of that construction seminar later this week to help you get advice on how to do that. I have to be a little bit of a lawyer now and get you into some kind of legal terms, but I want to do it on a very cursory basis, just so there are some important nuggets you can take away about what happens when you rebuild. And the first thing is, are you going to rebuild essentially exactly the same thing? If it's the same thing, it's the same size building, it's not any taller, it doesn't have additional parking, it doesn't have additional uses. For example, if it currently was a restaurant, but now you have an idea that maybe I could have a restaurant plus a few offices, or a restaurant plus a small retail establishment, then you're into a change of use of the land. So my point here is, if you're rebuilding exactly what was there and you have a good contractor, the process of getting approval should go very smoothly. If you think that this is an opportunity to create some other business opportunities for yourself, you have to think about what I call land use 101. And there are three things to keep in mind. And that this isn't the order I have them on the screen, but this is the order I'm going to do them in. Is the first thing is, your building, what you want to build, is in what we call an allowed use. And that simply means that in the zoning code, it's, for example, allowed to be a 2-story building that has retail and restaurants. And if it says that, and that's what you're rebuilding, then hopefully all you have, as long as you don't expand the size of that building or change parking requirements, is you have your contractor going into the city and getting a building permit. A very simple process that happens administratively, doesn't require hearings before the Planning Commission or the City Council. So that, if you're trying to do this, get your doors open and you can rebuild what you had before, that's my advice. Work with your contractor or designer to get that done. I need to tell you about two other concepts too. One's called a conditional use. And a conditional use means that the use, the kind of thing that's going to be in the building is allowed to happen, but additional conditions are put on the approvals. And those conditions are usually related to how that building interacts with the neighborhood around it. And parking is the one that's most important. So for example, if you have a restaurant and you expanded the number of seating in that restaurant, and that led to a need to have an additional parking requirement, and you have the land for that, you might be into a situation of needing a conditional use permit. That's important to you from a timing standpoint, because now that's something that requires a public hearing. So it's not just a staff person in the Planning and Economic Development Office granting a permit, it actually requires a hearing before a public body. And again, these are the kind of things that through Legal Corps or through Dorsey, I think it'd be wise to get some legal advice on, and we'd be happy to make ourselves available. The final land use comment that I want to talk about is non-conforming use. And this is kind of a a challenging topic or phrase, I guess, because it sounds negative, but non-conforming use is a positive thing. What non-conforming use means in a nutshell is that your building maybe didn't meet the zoning requirements that exist today. However, your building met the zoning requirements when it was built 20 years ago or 75 years ago. And so if your building is destroyed because of casualty, like what has happened, you're allowed to build exactly the same building, but not increase it in size. And so that is a situation, without looking at all the pieces of property, I could imagine could happen to a number of your pieces of property. So just be aware that that means that you won't probably be able to expand it without going perhaps the conditional use route or another route that I didn't talk about called a variance, but you can rebuild the same thing. And again, without any disrespect to our regulatory friends at the city, I think one of the things through Minneapolis Forward and so forth we want to work through is to have a very abbreviated non-conforming use process. And so you are entitled to build the same building. Just have confidence of that, and then get the legal advice you need to make sure you can get it approved. And if we can go to our final substantive slide here, I just wanted you to know where you go in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Again, the office in Minneapolis is called the Community Planning and Economic Development Office in downtown. In St. Paul, it's called Planning and Economic Development. Again, I'm happy to provide through Legal Corps or otherwise specific contact information. But if you're using a contractor, they're going to know how to do that. If you have one of these other situations where you have to get a more complicated land use permit, then I frankly suggest in this trying time and with the need to move as quickly as you're going to want to, I think you should get some pro bono legal advice, and we can help create the contacts within. And my final point is, I'm very hopeful, as the phrases are used, that all of us have your back. I mean, we really do. And I hope you understand that I'm surprised, frankly, as a guy that works with local governments and have for over 30 years, that people are trying to react very quickly. I wish I could give you every answer today what the solution is, but I know that one of the solutions is to sort of create a one-stop shopping scenario where you can have the opportunity to tap into local and community economic relief at the same time that you can get other kind of governmental approvals. And so with people like Jonathan Weinhagen and his colleagues working on that, I'm hopeful that, you know, in the next days, weeks, we'll have some additional information to convey on that. And with that, thank you for joining this webinar. I think Alyssa is going to give us some more information on what's coming up. And we really do wish you all the best, and want you to know that you've got a whole team of people out there that want to be of continued assistance to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jay and Kevin and Ken, who are still on, and Jonathan for having joined us. We really appreciate all the time you've put into preparing these materials. And for you attendees, thanks for joining us today. I don't see that any questions have popped up in the chat. If anything comes up after, please really do feel free to use the contact information that we've provided, or reach out to me and I can put you in touch with the right person. I did want to let you know that our next 2 days sessions are happening exactly as was scheduled on the original invite that I am imagining you all received. And so we'll be talking tomorrow about real estate and leasing and supply chain issues. And we'll be talking Thursday about construction issues. And just like I did today, I'll be sending the PowerPoint out for those in advance of the presentation. I did want to let you know that we are canceling Friday's session, which Friday's session was just supposed to be kind of a catch-all for all the questions that come in. Our office has actually made the decision to be closed on Friday in honor of Juneteenth and the end of slavery. And so we find it important to give our staff a holiday that day, and we're hoping that people will use it to be thinking about and processing change in all of our lives and how we can be part of the solution for racial justice issues. So I'll put that in an email as well, but just wanted to give you the heads up that that Friday session will be canceled. So thanks for all of your time, and we will continue to be in touch. Thank you.